Let's go to share. Hold on. Okay. Learning a Mammar and Parshas Vayakel tonight. Last parsha, the last section of Torah Or. Next week we turn over to the Kutei Torah. So the Mammar starts like this. We've learned this Mammar before in the past. This is we're talking about the collecting. Moshe and Aaron collected the monies for the building of the Mishkan. So it says, "Chumi itchem truma Hashem." The verse says, "Take from within you." He's talking to the Jewish people, a giving towards Hashem, to Hashem. Kol nediv liba yivieha eis trumas Hashem, and the giving heart should give the giving of God. So what's to God and of God is the question here. So he says, what are these two givings? Achas la Hashem, one is to Hashem. V'habez, and the second giving is Trumas Hashem, giving of Hashem. So we're not going to be talking about the actual giving, although that was what happened at the time of the Mishkan. We're also talking about in general the idea of what does it mean avoda, our service of Hashem. It says, the verse says, Hine Truma Lachin Reimus. Truma means elevation, to lift up. Like it says, Arimimcha Alikai HaMelech. You lift up our Lord, our King. V'gam Truma Lashon HaFrasha. Truma means a lifting up, and also can mean separation, to separate. For instance, you separate your monies, what you're going to give from those monies towards Hashem, towards the building of the tabernacle. Lahafrish Truma, to separate the giving. To understand, what is this elevation? What does it mean to elevate through giving? So the Rebbe says, it's known, Shiesh Beis Bechinas B'Ishtalshus. This is because it's a long mimer, and we're going to get used to this more when we get to Torah, or the Kutei Torah with the Mammar longer. We're not going to learn all the mimer. We're going to have to skip through it to be able to get to the conclusion of it within the time that we have. So we're learning about what does it mean. There's two types of how godliness comes down and is manifest in the world. There's Mimali Kolam, how Hashem fills the world, which we've learned about many times. There's Saiviv Kolam, and how God is encompassing the world. So he's going to explain again what those two levels means. So Bechinas Mimali Kolam, what does it mean God fills the world? The example that we can understand is how the soul functions in the body. And encloses itself in the body. The different functionalities, the very fact that it's not general, it goes in, there's the thought process, the speech, the action, the different abilities, the mobility of the body in its differences is the way the soul clothes itself in the differences of the abilities of the body, starting off with thought, speech, and action. And intellect is in the head, right? You're thinking in with your head. Each limb has its functionality. You run with your feet, you could walk with your feet, you do things with your hands, etc. There's a little bit of this section here, and then we're going to skip further. The life force of the soul means the soul is not like a general electricity, so to say, that if it goes into it's like a battery that goes into AA batteries could go into one machine, into another machinery, and doesn't make a difference what the machinery is, as long as it's built to take this kind of battery, it's going to have energy. The neshama itself, the soul itself, has within it the differences itself. It encloses itself, and it itself has its functionality, the ability to see, hear, eat, taste, do, think. All those differences that we have within our body are expressions of the soul's differences as it encloses itself in the body. The vitality of each of the soul goes into each individual function of the body. So it starts off with the main part of the vitality of the soul is in the brain. That's the biggest receptacle of the soul. And from the brain, which it sends the signals out to the rest of the body. The soul, the brain distributes the soul power into the different various parts of the body according to what it needs and its functionality. For instance, he gives an example. Ba'ayin, in the eye, the ability to see means the soul's ability to see. If it would go into another part of the body, it'd be a problem on both sides. Both the vision is not in the right place, and it's not the eye, so you won't see anything. So the power to see goes into the eyes. That's the vessel for seeing. Uba'izin in the ears, the ability to hear something. The koyach mobility, doing things, goes into the hands. At koyach all the way down to the feet, the ability to walk. Goes down to the feet. Nimsa, so it comes out. What are we saying over here? The point is that in each part of the body has its ability to do what it has to do. The idea of his chalkus, the separation. There's a body with a lot of things that are going on that have a lot of abilities, and the neshama divides not just different amounts of energy, but different types of energy to each part of the body according to what it needs, and what distributes it is the brain. Because the signals of the heart, of the soul, so to say, of the soul is distributed by the brain, therefore it has the largest receptacle, so to say, of the light of the life of the soul. What makes it so special? The special is the vessel itself, right? So the vessel of the brain is the most, mezuchach means refined or delicate, less megushim, less physical, closest to spiritual, so to say. So it could be the receptacle of the soul. Therefore, could receive more. And so what happens in the brain? Not just that it distributes the life force or the functionality of the rest of the body, but also that the soul's inner character is most revealed in the brain. Its ability to think, how it thinks, what it thinks about, what excites it. That's all starting off in the brain because it's the most refined part of the body, and therefore it has the most essential part of the character of the soul. It's the revelation of the intellect and thinking of the soul. The hands, for instance, the hands don't have the revelation of the character on the level of the brain. It has other talents, right? The very fact that most of us, Baruch Hashem, will have a healthy, similar body with, let's say, 10 fingers, 2 hands, and doesn't necessarily mean we all can do things. It's not just a question of strength, it's also a question of ability to use our hands in the right way. There's many reasons why we have different abilities in our hands, but it's not the same differences as we have in our brain. So the hand is not so refined. What's revealed in the hands is only the ability to do things. Yes, it could do things on a high level, etc. Even sometimes in a fascinating level. People have abilities to do things with their hands. However, nothing to the level of the revelation of the character of the soul and the brain. But still the hands have a much larger, a much greater revelation of the character of the soul than the feet do, right? So the feet, of course, you have people that have stronger feet than others, could run faster, all that, but it's not the talents that the hands have in doing things is not to say is on a much higher level than the ability for the feet to show themselves as something unique. It means you see less of the character, of the uniqueness of the individual soul in the feet than you see in the hands. And the hands less than the brain. And this is all an example of how Hashem fills the world. As the godliness goes into the lower worlds, we're the lowest world. So imagine, we're like the feet of the body. So how little of expression of the character. That's why you have a world that's so dark that could say, Li or Ivani Esiseni. I'm self-made person. I don't recognize God. God forbid. Why? Because there's much less revelation. So like he says, for instance, the strength of the feet is just in its walking. Like it talks about the different abilities that the woman had in preparing the articles of the Mishkan, whether it was the weaving, etc. So you have many talented machshavos that are revealed in the hand. It should be a dime. Hold on a second, I'm not sure what Aaron is. Aaron, something's wrong with the reception. No. So Mashain can be you could write with things of wisdom. Even though the so to say the intellect of the person is not actually revealed in the hand can't think, but it has a much greater connection in the functionality between the hand and the brain than between, let's say, the hand and the feet, or the brain and the feet. We don't see the seichel, the intellect of the person revealed in the feet. Now, of course, there's little things that you could do. There's dancing, there's climbing, there's other things that we see a person's abilities with their feet different than the next person. But again, that's less than we see in the hands. But on the other side, if you want to look at the flip side, the feet are not useless, God forbid. Very important. Why? The head can have a lot of ideas, but it's not going anywhere on its own without the feet. This is the rule of creation, that the end game is connected to the beginning game, which is our world. The nuts, it connects the end with the beginning. The feet, although they may have the least revelation of the soul, but nothing happens without the feet. The feet is the ability for us to move around and get things done. There's something that's in the end that's connected to the essential beginning of the full picture. But nevertheless, it's still the end. It's not the hand. It's not the beginning. It's not the middle. He says there's revelations in the hand. More than there's in the feet. For instance, you could write, if you want, for instance, you have an idea and you want to type it today or write it with your hands, you need your hands. So one of the methods of articulating your seichel, your intellect, is through the hands. The feet, much less. The point is the fundamental point you're saying over here is that there's his chalkus, the separation. His chalkus means from the word lechalek, to separate. The person has separation, different abilities, and the soul functions within each one of those abilities, meaning to say the different powers of the body have different levels of the soul, different levels of revelation, different levels of connection. And this is all an example of what does it mean Hashem fills the world. This is what it means, the chain of creation. How the infinite light that goes into the world, in every world and every creation, according to its abilities, according to its measurements, like the body goes into the different limbs of the body according to its measurements. Each world according to, and each creation, what it can handle. And this is what the Zohar means, that Hashem fills the world. Meaning we're not talking about different levels of Hashem. It's talking about how God manifests within the world. He manifests within the world that there's the head, there's the higher levels, and it goes all the way down to the lower levels. Now, to stop here for a second, in another Mammar, the Rebbe Explains, because we've learned before that the nations of the world are only connected to this level of godliness, of God, how he fills the world. The level that we're going to learn next, which is Soviv, how God's beyond the world, how he's encompassing, by definition, encompasses everything equally. It doesn't encompass it. The whole idea that there's separation, more revelation in the higher point, less revelation in the lower point, that's the fundamental difference between the way God fills the world and encompasses the world. Filling the world is the separation, higher, lower, less, more. So if everything's equal, it's creation. It's just the very fact, the whole idea of creation It's already a descent for God, and he gives chayis, he gives general life to the whole concept of creation, but not in a divided way, just that creation exists. And so the Alter Rebbe says, therefore, because the nations of the world are only connected to the way God fills the world, therefore they look at themselves as lower, and they look always upwards. That the only way to get to God is to go higher. Where when Torah introduced, like God giving the Torah to the Jewish people, was specifically down here in the worlds where you could find God. That's what the whole Mishkan's about. The Mishkan is this idea that God could rest here, and specifically here is because where He wants. The Sof connection is connected to the why of the creation. Mimali is the what of creation. So the why of creation is that there should be a creation. God created all the worlds. So this should be our world, and in our world we should go through the struggles of life and do Torah mitzvahs. And therefore we find God specifically here. Whereas we don't have to look upwards. And that was the foundation of why they went into idol worship. Because they couldn't understand that how could we, in our low world, we have any connection to God? We have to find something higher. We have to serve the sun, we have to serve the stars. So let's go a little bit further here, explaining the idea of Mimalis, so we can get back to the idea of the Mishkan and what it means in Avodah. So he says,
well, I thought he started off with not just separation, but lifting up, just like that word meant those two things. The taking of the census also has those two aspects, which is also in the portion.
Lifting up, the two aspects meaning of lifting up and separation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the Alter Rebbe is like this. For instance, in the higher worlds, let's say the Garden of Eden, Modar Tzadikim Agdolim, the place where the great righteous people are. Mer Begil Yoser, there's more revelation, like the head of the person in the example given. V'hukim Shal HaSeichel, like the intellect. It's in the brain. The worlds of the angels, which is the lower world and the great of the higher level of Garden of Eden. Meaning the difference between the tzaddik and the higher level of tzaddik and the angel is the tzaddik at its highest level. The highest level of the neshama, the soul, connects to the intellect. The highest level of the malachim come from the chayes hakodesh, from the animal on the chariot, which is the highest level of the emotion of the emotion of God. So here it says the olam of the world of the angels. What is their character? Is defined by their love for God, ba'ahava, love, yira, and fear for God, which tivim they have in a natural way, a natural love and fear of God. They don't have to develop it. But they don't have the intellect, the comprehension. Hasaga means the comprehension of godliness. It's an emotional relationship. Obviously, their intellect is great, but their intellect is focused on their emotion. So they're like the hands. The hands are represented in Chesed Gvura. The head is Chacham Bina Das. Chesed Royamina, Chesed is on the right side. That's the camp of Michael. Bechinas Ava, love. Machni Michal, the camp of Michal. Gvura, which is severity. Awe, fear. The Roy is smaller. The left side. Bechinas Yira, fear. Machni Gavriel, the camp of the angel Gabriel. Means, what does it mean? The camp of Gabriel, the camp of Michal. They have thousands of or millions of angels that are under them in their different regiments and camps. They have understanding, but it's like the intellect that is expressed in the hands. It means the hands don't think, but the hands have the ability to articulate a thought, right? When you write something. So too, as the intellect is right? A person, based on how much you understand, is how much you feel. A child who has, like the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, who has a small mind, wants small things, has a desire for small things, is excited or upset about small things. The larger your ability to understand something is, your larger your ability to understand the situation and respond properly, or what we call maturely, to a situation. You don't get so upset about small things, and you don't get necessarily so excited about small things either. Or you do get excited about things because you understand the issue at hand, if it's something to be excited or fearful about, right? Child doesn't have the same fears of an adult. because it doesn't have the information to understand that you should be fearful. There's different levels within the angels. Shemayim, which is represented by fire, which is Gvura, Mayim is water, is Chesed. Shemidish V'lev, the different functionalities of the emotions of the angels. There's more external, there's different levels as well. And the angels who give blessings, their source of blessings that go down into the world. So all this, everything goes according to its level. Okay. We're going to okay, let's do this last piece, and then we're going to skip to Soviv Kolam. It says, you give life to everything. God encloses himself within the world. He fills the world, again, everything according to its level. This is what it means. In the heavens, there's more revelation. And the heavens have more than the earth. We see clearly that our world has less revelation. And he goes into explaining one example about this, is he goes into explaining about the man on Shabbos. The idea of Chitzonis and Pnimis, the different levels of revelation, is he goes into the question of why the man didn't fall on Shabbos. The man didn't fall on Shabbos because the man the man was a spiritual energy that sustained the angels, but how did we eat it? The angels don't have physical bodies. The body of the angels is only made up of the elements of fire and wind. So they don't have the mayim and offer to have physical bodies to eat physical food. So how could they sustain themselves on the man if the man was a physical food? The Torah says they grounded the man, they shaped it into foods. So it was a physical food. The man wasn't just a spiritual food. So the idea is that it goes from spiritual and becomes physical through the chain of creation. And therefore the man was representation of the pneumius, of the inner desire of Hashem, and therefore it couldn't come down on Shabbos because Shabbos there's no flow. Shabbos only has an external flow. Not it's like a person who has no interest right now but puts things on pause. So the world still exists like it does on Rosh Hashanah before the new light comes down, but it doesn't. But there's no pneumius, there's no focus yet. The focus hasn't been created. Okay, that's a different concept, but the idea is to explain the chain of light. But I want to explain the second one because it's an interesting concept. It brings another idea to understand of how things transform from spiritual into physical, how the chain of light makes its chain down all the way down to the physical world. And on what level, what does it mean if it's in a limited way, or if it's even in this world, is it in a more spiritual way? It says, will understand this. Parshas Shlach. Parshas Shlach is the parsha where Moshe sends the spies. So in the mission that he sends the spies, he asks the spies to check Hayesh Bahem Ba'etz Imayin. Do they have a tree or not? Seemingly, that's if you think about it, what kind of mission, what kind of part of the mission was that? I mean, obviously they had trees. I mean, again, Moshe Rabbeinu himself possibly was in Eretz Yisrael. Like the Rebbe says, they brought foods. I mean, Eretz Yisrael, Israel from Egypt is not so far that it took 40 years, and not because it takes 40 years to go to Egypt. It takes a few days, even by foot. But it was because we traveled a long way. But there's definitely knowledge if there's trees there or not. So what does it mean that he gave them a mission to check Hayesh ba eitz imayin? Is there any trees in Israel? So Pirush B'Zohar Kadasham. The Zohar explains what's Moshe asking. Shirat Zuleida, he wasn't asking if there's trees. Obviously, there's trees, but he wanted to know Muhus Hashba Nimshach B'Eretz Yisrael. What type of flow of godliness is revealed in Eretz Yisrael? Im hi rak mi b'chinas eitz. Is it only from the level of the tree? What does it mean, the level of the tree? Hu b'chinas eitz hachaim, the tree of life. Means it comes from a spiritual source, which is spiritual source is Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life is Chaim is life, is spirituality, is godliness. But that starts from the level of wisdom. Chachma gives life. Eitz achayim. V'gam eitz lochin eitza usishia, ideas. V'b'chinas chachma, which comes from chachma. Or is the flow from the nothingness above the chachma. Chachma is the beginning of the chain of creation. How God, like we said before, God, like the soul goes first into the brain, and from there it gets distributed throughout the body. So what Moshe would want to know is the flow of Eretz Yisrael from the level of chachma, means everything is the regular flow of the Eitz HaChaim, of the tree of life that goes into the world? Or does Eretz Yisrael have a revelation of the ayin, the nothingness beyond, which is beyond the chachma? Chachma is the beginning of creation. So how does godliness reveal itself in Eretz Yisrael? Does it reveal itself in the regular way, like the flow of life into the world, or from the level of ayin, of nothingness, beyond creation? Which is much greater than the wisdom. Chachma comes from the nothingness. So where is the flow of Eretz Yisrael? Does it go through the system of creation, or is it beyond? Vasimun, and he said, what would be the sign? If things came, the flow came down through the Eitz HaChaim, or through the ayin, or the nothingness. He says, Im yiru gidul haperos aderech shara tzayis. If the fruits grew just like other countries, nothing greater, nothing spectacular. Then it comes from the Eitz HaChaim, from the tree of life. God's presence is filling the world. Everything comes from Chachma. And that would show that Eretz Yisrael is like any other place. Like it says, what is Chachma? Bereshis, the beginning of creation starts with Chachma. But if you see that the trees, the fruit in Eretz Yisrael are something unique, spectacular. If you're going to see, when you spy out in Eretz Yisrael, that the flow is not regular in Eretz Yisrael, as the Gemara in Ksuvas talks about much later in the time of the Second Temple, describing the great brachas of Eretz Yisrael, of how great the fruits and vegetables were, the animals were. As you'll clearly see that Eretz Yisrael gets a bracha through ayin, beyond the chachma, beyond the system. Therefore, because the flow comes from such a high place, it manifests in the world and not in a measured way. Because it doesn't pass through concentrations and contractions. So the flow is much greater, and therefore it creates greater. It creates much more spectacular things. So from here he says we see that there can be, that there in creation itself there should be greater flows, like the question Moshe asked about Eretz Yisrael. Did they have a hashpa from the tree or from the nothingness? How's that possible? So from here we see that even if there's a flow that has to go through the system, otherwise it wouldn't be food, like the man has to be food. But there still could be a higher power that flows through creation, that creates something spectacular, even within the limitations of creation. Therefore, there would be more blessing. And the growth of things in Eretz Yisrael would be greater. Because says this is all an example of how Hashem fills the world. That you could get the highest flow. But it goes everything through each world and each creation according to its level. And that's the whole thing of division, separation. There's no limit to how many different levels there are. Even within the worlds themselves, like in our world, there's things that are lifeless, like stones, things that grow but they can't move. You have chai, which are the animal kingdom, medaber, people that speak. So we have different levels of revelation of godliness that expresses itself in the abilities of different things that have been created. That's all a sign of levels of flow. וגם בכל מכינס מדלת בכינס אלה יש מדרגות שונות עד אין קץ. There's many different levels. Some people have more abilities than others. Some trees are different than other vegetations, etc. Everything has its level. This is what it means, how God comes into the world. So there can be a superpower that goes through this system. That's what Moshe wanted to know, how much flow Eretz Yisrael got. But it's all a breakdown of the system. This is all under the idea of M'amar the Rebbe, how Hashem fills the world. So again, the lower you are, the less there's revelation. So you're always looking upwards. This is what we're getting back to. Truma. Truma means to lift up. What are we trying to lift up to? So first we have to understand what's the system. Second level of revelation is Bechinas Soviv Kalam. This is the way Hashem encompasses the world. It's not a level of godliness that's within the world, like we said, the way God fills the world, like the neshama, the soul fills the body. When it says it's encompassing, Soviv means from around. It doesn't mean that it's a space question that's outside of the world. Of course, it's a level of godliness within the world. Doesn't enclose itself in it. Doesn't enclose itself in the differences. It's all the world. It's not that Hashem is from the level of Soviv is not paying attention to the details, but he's not enclothing himself in the details. And therefore, there's an effect. The uniqueness of this is the ability that specifically it's all about the idea of the plan, the reasoning of creation, the why, like I said, and not the what.
Can we experience the Sovev?
Sure, we do all the time when you do a mitzvah. You learn Torah. That's the whole point. That's what he's coming to say.
No, I mean a mitzvah goes when we have like Ruach HaKodesh. Do we get into the Sovev or just the Mimale?
It's a good question. I'm almost certain that even prophecy is coming from M'amar the Rebbe. It's like the man. It's just a greater level of revelation. Sovev Kalam is the ability to connect to Hashem outside of the limitations of creation, which is Torah mitzvahs. The ability to take something physical, make it holy, and do a mitzvah, do God's will in the creation. That's Sovev Kalam. But just to have information,
we can't reach that level, right? What level can people reach, like in prophecy? What level? That it goes to maybe to Bina of in this, in not Sove, the Bina of Mamali.
The very fact that there's prophecy even by the nations, right? Bilam was a prophet, is a sign that prophecy comes from M'amar the Rebbe. It probably does come from a level of Chachma of M'amar the Rebbe, because prophecy is prophecy and Ruach HaKodesh are not the same thing.
I know, but I mean both of those. Do they
Ruach
relate to
HaKodesh,
Mamali or Sovev?
Ruach HaKodesh, I have to check. Let me check, but I'm almost certain prophecy comes from M'amar the Rebbe. Ruach HaKodesh possibly could come from Soviv, because it's about Kodesh is separation. Kodesh, by definition, the word Soviv is Kodesh.
I thought prophecy was above Ruach HaKodesh.
It's above as far as information goes, but not necessarily from holiness. I mean, as far prophecy is you have information, God's revealing secrets or expressing Himself to people in this world. But Ruach HaKodesh is the Kodesh. It's in general. Means separation. The angels, because they come from the world of Mamala, cannot say Kodesh until we say Kodesh. Kodesh is separation. That's the definition of Soviv. It's separate from the world. It doesn't mean necessarily you have a higher level of understanding, but it's again, like I said, every person.
I'm talking about mystical experience, basically.
I know you're trying to get at, but I'm saying mystical experience is not necessarily is not necessarily what you'll get through Torah. Mystical experience is mystical experience, and a mystical experience is a higher level of consciousness of Mammar. It's not self-harm.
So mystical experience you're saying is from Sovev.
It's from M'amar Kalam. Just like M'amar Kalam has higher levels of revelation in the higher worlds, it's a person who's trying to tap into a higher level of consciousness of godliness, of spirituality. The B'chinas Soviv, what's Soviv? Who or v'chayis l'ki she'enim slavish tochal mamish. Right? If you're Soviv, all of a Soviv mimal, it's not outside in space. El shugam kein tochal, it's in the world. El she'enim slavish b'em, doesn't include itself in the world. When shekasev halayis l'shemayim v'sa'aretz animali, God fills the whole world. Ani, which is God Himself, which is the way God is higher than being mischalik, separate within the energies of the world. She'em v'chayis hu b'chinas yischalkus klal. The point, the difference in Soviv and Mal is there's no ischalkus, no separation. There's no power to the hand versus the power to the feet or the brain, etc. Ani Rishon v'Niachron. God, it's the same beginning and same the end. Kadmi l'chol hakadumim, the beginning of all beginnings. It's all limitations. Mahalich taf kufshana, 500-year walk. Ragli achayis, the feet of the angels. So what does it mean, Ari Mimcha? What does it mean that you lift yourself up? That this Aramimcha, the God is elevated, lifted up in the highest of levels. Elikai, our Lord, how do we lift up? How does a person connect? You're asking, how do you connect through to Soviv? So how do you have a Ramimcha Elikai? It's through Melech. Melech Shmoy Nikra Aleim Kimshal Melech Shrak Shmoy Spashtusem Medin Mamshaltei. The very definition of God is just, so to say, king. King is very separate from the essence. Just the name. It doesn't have to do with the essence of the Creator. And how God fills the world in a way of encompassing. He's a king over creation. What makes it? Where is it recognized? We don't create the concept. We reveal the concept. Where is it revealed in creation? Why they straws through the Jewish people? Ein melech b'layam, because you can't have a king without a people. God means when you have, but we're limited. We're mortals, so everything is something. The question is, what is that something? God is nothing. I mean, say God is ayin, the nothingness. So what makes him be king? There has to be a purpose. And the purpose is Yisrael. By doing Torah mitzvahs, we create the ruts and the want for there to be creation. And then there's creation with all its details and how God manifests. And therefore there's all these worlds. But if not for the why, which is Yisrael, there's no king, there's no what? There's a melech b'layam, there's no king without people. But David and King David says, Ba'at Klal Yisrael, that on behalf of the Jewish people, how does God get elevated? What makes him elevated in the world? It means that there's even the God that's elevated. Soviv is a manifestation. It's not the essence. It's Soviv Kolamim. It's encompassing the world. It's the way God is outside of the limitations, but that itself is a manifestation. It's connected to creation. What even brings this level of elevation within God is through the Jewish people that Aydei Melch, the fact that he's king. Okay, he's going to go into explaining this in more detail. We're going to skip that part, and I want to go into the next section, which is going to go into the avoda. What's the idea of how do we connect this over? Again, it's not
What page are you on?
We're on page. We're going to go now to the bottom of page 13. This is second to last paragraph on the left-hand side. So that's like this. So the question is, how do you connect to Soviv? If Soviv is our Mimcha, and it's done through the Jewish people being the people of God, give purpose to creation. It says, where do we have the ability? Is that we should reveal the Creator in creation. That God should want to be king, to give life to creation, to limitations. This is what the Torah says. What's that voda part? How do we work on ourselves to inspire God? So it says, and we're getting ready for Pesach. We just finished Purim. I'm still just a few hours out of Purim. That it says, Shivas Yamim Teichel Matzis Lechamoini. The first 7 days the Jewish people left Egypt, they had to eat the poor man's bread. Lechamoini's matzah is called the poor man's bread. It has no lift, doesn't lift up. It has very limited taste. In order how do we receive the Torah on Shavuos face to face? God gives us his gift of the Torah and the mitzvahs. And through doing the Torah and mitzvahs in this world, we're revealing Soviv in this world. maybe not in the way that you see it, but that's the fact. It's like the Alter Rebbe says, it's like munach bekufsa. It's like someone has money put in the bank. So after the Jewish people left Egypt, you have to go through a process. What gives you the ability that through things that you do, you're limited? What's the difference in what you do? Someone else does it. Not only that, by a non-Jew putting on tefillin doesn't do anything, doesn't bring down any amshacha. How do we bring within ourselves, reveal within ourselves that there should be the aroi mimcha that God gets, that we're revealing soviv in the world? So after the Jewish people left Egypt, they were still, so to say, connected to the back of Hashem. They didn't have a personal relationship to God. They had to count the Omer, Zayin Shvu, 7 weeks, and that's what we know. We learned about many times. The Sphere Omer is the working on the building and refining our character to be ready to start doing the Torah mitzvah. So but what's the first week? The first week before we start any avoda of working on our midos, we have to eat matzah. What is the idea? So the Rebbe explains it this. The animal soul that we all have has 7 bad character traits, general character traits, which are represented by the 7 midos, the 7 attributes. And there's each one is 7 that's made up of 7. That's why there's 49 days of the Omer. Like we've learned many times, there's chesed of chesed, there's gevura of chesed, there's the severity within chesed. And we will learn in the Mammar of Sphere Omer to understand better what are the 49 different character traits of the 49 midos. But they're generally 7 times 7. 7, each one is broken up into 7. Zayin Pam Sayin Hey Mem Tes, which are the 49. That's the idea of each sphera, each day that we count. What's the idea of the counting? To transform each character of ourselves from a bad character to positive character. The general character of love is the first week. The character of chesed is the first week. The second week is gevura, etc. We have to transform each day one point of it. That's why the sacrifice of the Omer, which was on the 16th of Nisan, right after the first day of Pesach, right? Mammar Shabbos. So what was the Omer? What was the kind of grain? It was barley, Michael Behema, animal food, because we're dealing with the animal within us. The animal soul. And the point of these 7 weeks of the Omer is we're supposed to transform these characters slowly. Not something you can do right away. First day, chesed, the kindness within kindness. And when we light up each character, what does it mean to transform it? Give it light. Make it when you're talking about spiritual awareness. Spiritual awareness is not just that you say that I have a godly understanding. Spiritual awareness only has a point. There's only a purpose. Is if it transforms you. That now you've brought light to your chesed and the chesed within chesed. Like when you bring light and pushes away the darkness, you bring light to that character trait within you. Each person is made up different, right? We're not all made equally. We all have the 49 midos, but different proportions of it to have different focuses. Each one of us make up our character. But you bring light to each point of that within yourself. And you transform to push away the darkness, and you show that your animal really has a holy side to it. And that's why the famous idea says Sfartim. Sfartim means count. Sfartim also means Lashon Or, give light to your character. Hayom is light. Light. And to bring down the light to M'amar the Rebbe Explains. So the light is higher than the midah, and therefore it can transform the attribute. Instead of loving the world, which you have the ability to love, the question is what you're focusing your love on. Is love Hashem, to love God. That after Shabbos you start to bring clarity, sphera, brightness. Shabbos means beyond the 7 days of creation. From above the 7 days, which are the 7 midos, you have a power to transform the character within you. The question is, how could a person all of a sudden wake up one day and say, I want to transform myself? Where do you have that ability to do that within yourself? You can't just decide one day to transform yourself. You have so many. What are you gonna? How do you make that maneuver? You can't transform yourself until you first restrain yourself. And what's the fundamentals of restraining yourself? Means you want to do something, but you're not going to. What power do you have to awaken within yourself when you want to do something, but you won't do it? Is the b'chinas bittul, to nullify what you want to what Hashem wants from you. Batal ritzayncha, nullify your want. You can't go from being a person who's something for the world, I love the world and all that, to all of a sudden loving God. Can't go from something to something. There has to be a bittul first. Leave the first something to go to the new something. That's one of the rules of Chassidus. That's how yesh, ein, yesh. Kimshal, the famous example, is the garim, the seed, anizr baris that gets planted. Shemisrakev, tchila v'nasa b'chinas ayin. First it dissolves in the earth, becomes nothing. Only then can that same seed become a tree. And that when it nullifies itself, and it surrenders itself, and it has faith that this experience is not just to lose itself totally, but to be able to become a new self, to go from a seed to becoming a tree, then you make yourself the bittul. The nullification allows for you to properly transform yourself from one something to another something, but it has to go through the process of bittul, which is you have to, you can't just say, I'm going to change what I want before you control what you want. If the seed is not going to, the seed is going to fight the system and say, I don't want to dissolve in order to become a tree. I want my seed to become a tree automatically. You're still something. There's a question the Gemara goes down about if there's he brings down that a beitza treifa is aser, a egg from a non-kosher, from a bird, a chicken, let's say that's treif, it's going to die. It's not healthy. It's not kosher because of it's not going to live out 12 months. However, an efrech shall beitza treifa mutter, but you can eat a chick that came from an egg of a chicken that's not healthy. So why? Because once it becomes a chick, it's a new metzias. As long as it hasn't totally come something new, it's still connected to the old. So he says, "Kachi efsher." So too, it's impossible. Liyas m'chinas avish abluma. So you can't go from loving the world, m'chinas avish Hashem, to loving God. First, they have to exercise self-nullification, which is restraining yourself. Hashem echad, God is one. V'yahavta, I love. First, give yourself over to God. Nullify yourself. To give yourself over to the oneness of Hashem. Then you could love Hashem with all your heart, even the Yetzer Hara. To transform your other side. This is why the Jewish people had to eat matzah the first week after leaving Egypt. Matzah is the poor man's bread. That's the idea of bittul. The first week, or even before they started to count, they started to eat matzah. Matzah is not transformation, but restraining yourself, nullifying yourself. It doesn't rise like leavened bread. It doesn't taste like bread as good. It's because it doesn't have isnasus, it doesn't have taste. Because it doesn't have elevation, it doesn't have taste. If you're not even in a holy, so to say, ego, you're bottle, you have less taste in your service of God. You don't look at yourself as, wow, I just did a great mitzvah, which is nothing wrong with that, but there's a process. That's why we have to eat the Pesach, we have to eat the matzah first, before we can receive the Torah. Before we want to start working on ourselves, to transform ourselves, to make ourselves ready to receive the Torah, which receiving the Torah, which we said before, is the idea of connecting, bringing down the Soviv into the world. We have to lose ourselves. You can't just be, okay, we're here, I'm ready to start serving God. First, your soul has to be like nothing, like offer, like dirt to everything. Only then, open my heart to Torah. Only because you've been able to bring your soul to this nothingness, you could transform to be panim psach libi, to open my heart to Torah. And here the Alter Rebbe goes, this is the famous teaching of Chassidus. What is greater, to restrain yourself or to transform yourself? It's much harder to restrain yourself because you want to do something, but you're exercising restraint. You haven't yet transformed your emotions. You have to nullify your want to connect to the want of Hashem. And this exercise of practicing restraint, this nullification, in all the levels of restraint, it brings down an awakening, a response from Hashem, an awakening from above. That is the way you bring Soviv in the world. Means what inspires God to reveal a higher level, not just a higher level of light, like you were talking before about bringing more of the light of M'amar into the world, but to connect to the why of the creation, the Soviv, the part that's never connected to the whole, never detailed within the creation. The whole creation is part of that one thought of why there's the creation. How do we reveal that within the world? Is by exercising restraint, not by transforming ourselves. But that exercise of restraint is that we're going against our character. We're going against the character of how our teva, our nature. And our nature, as long as we're within our nature, we're within the limitations of M'amar the Rebbe, how Hashem fills the world. Once you exercise restraining yourself, you're restraining your nature. What you're tapping into is a higher energy, and that's how you tap into Soviv, by losing yourself, not by developing yourself. Then you could bring down a revelation of the world of Soviv Kalam. Just like God restrains himself, he limits himself to create the creation, that you're tapping into that means, again, God is beyond even Soviv. But in order God has to make himself want to be connected to creation. How do you connect to that want? Is by yourself losing yourself, because God also lowers himself. Okay, so the Mammar continues. I'm just going to finish off the last point. He goes into the whole idea of consistency. So we start off now. Okay, all right, let's just finish this piece until then we'll just say a little outside. We're trying to answer what's Truma La Hashem and Trumas Hashem. So we're going to get to what's Truma La Hashem, towards God. They're working towards God. He says, so we say after the Shema, we want to bring down the God's kingship, that he wants to be king, that should be forever. Okay, this is a rule in the Kabbalah. I'm not going to go into the hows, but the idea of Hashem is one, and Vod, which is consistency, la'olam vod, forever, are connected. Now rabbis have taught us. Anytime it says the word Vod, forever, it never stops. God will always be king on creation. What does this mean within ourselves? What does it mean forever? We have to develop within ourselves, reveal within ourselves consistency. The idea that you feel the one-time excitement and even the bittul, but if it wears off, it's not consistent. It has shinuyim, it has change. That's not enough. When you daven and after you daven, kol hayom, your whole day. What is the change? Change comes from, he was king and then he died. He's no longer king. The idea died within you. So that's the idea Truma La Hashem. The first Truma, the Truma of giving towards Hashem, is to connect, transform, starting with restraining, developing bittul, and to bring it into consistency. That's our avoda, to develop, to reveal a consistency in our bittul towards Hashem, to be panim to panim, to be face to face, to be able to receive the Torah, through all the avoda, the work that we do in ourselves. So he says, "V'inyan hamshacha zu lias baruch shein kvein mechus levad v'ayday sirus l'tata gamkem v'bechina zu she'en lehafsek." How do we reveal that it should be forever? If we're forever, we have no change. And where does a person get the ability that there shouldn't be change? The power within the person to have consistency does not come from intellect. It comes from being a Kabbalist Olnik, accepting the yoke. Accepting the yoke says, this is the way it is. It comes from the bittul of the person. Consistency is not something that it's harder to argue the argument of consistency. It's easier to say, I know that it's hard to be consistent, but I'm going to nullify myself. I'm going to accept the yoke and always be in a consistent way. The whole point of the yoke, of you put a yoke on an animal, is to enforce and to restrain, to go against the will of the animal. The animal doesn't want to plow. And when you have bittul, then there's no separation, there's no change. If you have bittul, you could bring bittul in to be consistent in your devotion and commitment to God in without any change. What does it mean without any change? That when the changes happen around you, you don't change. When does changes happen around you? When you leave the shul. If you're in the shul, fine, you're in a holy environment. When you walk out of the shul and you start facing other challenges, so there's changes happening around you. How do you keep that you're not going to change? That demands tremendous discipline and exercise and bittul. Even after you leave the shul, no longer connected to the deep thought of the contemplation of godliness. You could keep based on your resolution that you made when you did daven. But if you're only going to reveal the love, the emotion of the love without the discipline, so then you're going to love when the moment is right, and when change changes, then the love changes with the change. And therefore we see that what we said before, that iskafi, restraining yourself, is greater than transforming yourself. Because that's the tool, that's the energy that a person can connect to, that has the ability to be consistent. Then he goes on to explain where does change come from? Why is there change in the world? Change comes from the idea that there's the broken vessels, and then afterwards he goes to explain that we could reach even the level of Trumas Hashem, not just Truma Hashem, but to connect to the level of not going upwards, but just to be in a higher environment of the Nediv Lev. The Nediv Lev is the levels of our fathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, that they were in another reality of not even in the level of towards God, but with God. But that's another whole section of the Mammar. And I want to wish everyone, thank you for joining. Laila Tov. We learned about our dedication to having to build the Mishkan, and now we're actually living about building the Mishkan. That's the next two parshas of the week. Laila Tov, take care.
Thank you, Rabbi.